Professor Lenore Manderson. Why are collaborative networks so essential in this field?
Because I was thinking of all the collaborations that I've had were not particularly successful. So it's around an approach to complexity. And so collaboration is important from that.
Tropmed Talk.
Hello again, everyone. Welcome back to Bridging Generations in Research, Engaging Dialogues on Grants, Growth, and Early Career Success, brought to you by the TDR Global Asia. I am Rima, your host, an early career researcher passionate about One Health and a proud member of TDR Global Asia. In our very first episode, we explored the profound impact of mentorship with Professor Lenore Manderson, Distinguished Professor of Public Health and Medical Anthropology at the University of Witwatersrand, South Africa, with adjunct appointments at Monash University. If you missed it, I highly recommend going back and listening. There's so much wisdom packed in there. Today, we are shifting our gears to discuss collaborative networks in global health research, a topic close to my heart and essential for solving the world's most pressing health challenges. So, Professor Lenore, collaboration is buzzword in global health research, but it is much more than that. But if we take a look again, why are collaborative networks so essential in this field?
Good point. Because I was thinking of all the collaborations that I've had, some of which, were not particularly successful. I think the issue around tropical disease and neglected diseases of poverty, around One Health, planetary health, and around climate change and all of the things that we're doing in that domain is that none of us have all of those skills. So the collaborations are absolutely necessary to deal with what have been called wicked problems. And I remember when I first heard people talking about wicked problems that it seemed like a buzzword and I was not convinced. But basically what some people mean when they talk about that is that you need multiple approaches in order to tackle these complex problems. So it's around an approach to complexity. And so collaboration is important from that. But to unpack that a little, I think we learn to collaborate with supervisors and so, one's earliest collaboration is with one's fellow students and one's direct academic advisors, and then moves from there to the kinds of issues we might want to be studying and to building teams around people whose ideas are inspiring to you and for whom your ideas are inspiring too. So collaborations, I think, really begin with an idea of creating knowledge, not alone, but with other people. Now, when I trained and it was in humanities and social sciences, collaborations were pretty rare. People just did their own thing. And, the idea of an academic sitting in a library going through archival research or sitting in a kind of archetypal village or something doing research on their own held strong. But increasingly, everyone has become caught up with the fact that you shouldn't need to, the kind of knowledge we create that we need today demands multiple skills. And there are different ways to do it, of course, but it makes no sense for me, for example, to learn how to do sophisticated statistical modeling if I want that kind of perspective when I'm trying to think around contemporary challenges, when I can be working with someone who's interesting and exciting and likes what I bring to the table. So there's a mutuality in that kind of collaboration, which I think is wonderful. when I was originally working in tropical disease research, we trained people in multiple disciplines. And I think the lesson there was to learn to respect other disciplines. And maybe that's a key word for collaboration, that if you don't respect the other person's discipline, or if they don't respect yours, then the collaboration's not going to be particularly helpful. But if there's mutual respect, then it can be enormously exciting because each of you are bringing to the table a different set of knowledges which you can put together to think through some of these issues and to think collaboratively.
I see.
In the early 90s, when I was first thinking about this and a bit later, I was involved in a number of discussions about nurturing interdisciplinary researchers. And the model that we were looking at, and this was with the Social Science Research Council in New York, was about the idea of a joint degree. And the idea that people were rehearsing was that you would take a doctor and then the medical doctor, and then the medical doctor would do a PhD medical anthropology, and then you had a medical anthropologist. And there were a few programs set up like that. And the problem with that, of course, is that actually created a clinical anthropologist, not a medical anthropologist in a more general sense. And it's never convinced me that that would resolve health problems. You know, the idea was, well, if we have someone with those two skills together, they'll be better than two people, each with their own skill. And I've increasingly moved in my own mind to the power of individual disciplines and the importance of respect for those disciplines to bring them together. Now, for an individual, I mean, that does mean not that you do everything yourself, but you certainly need, of course, to know what those collaborations might involve. So I was talking about statistical modeling, but another very simple example would be a study of malaria. Now, I can go and ask people how they know, why they think they might have malaria and why they might go to the health centre or delay, and get to the cause of their understandings of disease transmission. But it makes no sense for me to dilute what I'm doing and to undervalue the work, for example, that an entomologist might do. So if I was interested in malaria in the context of climate change, I think it would be really interesting to have a team of people who were looking at the epidemiology of malaria, who were looking at changes in the environment, about changes of the habitat and feeding patterns and so on of mosquitoes, and its social aspects and health systems and so on, and bring them together. And so in that context, then respect is everything.
I see. Yeah. So that is a very great point. Very great point. Yeah, because collaboration broaden our visions, right, Professor Lenore? And talking about that one for early career researchers who are listening right now, what are some strategies that they can we use to build their professional networks?
Right. Which is a different kind of collaboration, isn't it? I mean, I think, though, to just stay with the example I was using, I think the risk is often that early career researchers become the junior partners with working to big names. And so there is an important issue there about ensuring that your own contributions are respected and that you're not exploited as labor. And you're not and that there isn't some kind of subtle valuing or devaluing of particular disciplines related to the status and the professional status of the individuals involved. And I mean, that involves everybody. So from the most senior to the most junior, there is a need for respect. But I mean, how I started collaborating, which was not actually in the area of tropical disease, it was much sooner, was when I was doing research with other people, and the collaboration came about simply about saying, oh, let's do something together. And so there are a couple of research projects I did when I was just finished my PhD, and we just got excited about sharing our ideas and then writing papers. And the pattern in the first ones was that I was first author, you were second author, and then you were first author and I was second author, and we just kept going like that. And we published a lot because there were two of us, so we bounced around ideas, and it was exciting, including to have an academic playmate. So some people marry their academic playmates, but most of us don't, right? We live with people who are not necessarily for our own field, but there is something really valuable about an academic who you're working with, who you really like. And I do think it's about then thinking about what kind of research you want and whether it's research you can do for yourself or whether it's better if you double up with someone. Now, related to that, because we're facing so many wicked problems, complex problems, including around One Health or antimicrobial resistance or climate change and so on, increasingly we do need other people, but also increasingly grant bodies are looking for multiple skills. So a single researcher saying, I'm going to study climate change in a city in my province, are not going to get funded because they don't have all the skill sets. So that if you wanted to apply for a grant, then the strategy of getting the grant is going to be linked to your capacity to bring together a team. And it doesn't have to be the most senior team in the world. But if you were very shrewd and you were a junior researcher, you'd think, who is actually more established than me, who I might want to work with, who I could bring on. So you'd actually be bringing on someone who in some respects might mentor you at the same time as working with you. And again, you know, the challenge is to make sure you've found someone who respects what you're saying and likes your ideas and doesn't dominate them and steer them in a different direction. But, you know, I think that kind of putting together a team, and the value of putting together a team is that you're more likely to get the grant, because the grants body these days is going to look at the names and then look at who's bringing what skills. Now, for that to work, it also makes sense to be collaborating before then in a less competitive way. And one of the things that people are always being asked to demonstrate is their ability or evidence that they've already collaborated with the person. So that if I decided I wanted to do some research on AMR and One Health and then put together a team including someone in agriculture and someone in big pharma and someone, a microbiologist and myself, then that wouldn't be credible unless I was already publishing with them. And so one of the ways to begin to do that is to be thinking about where do you want your research to go and who do you need as a collaborator who you could start doing some publishing with already, even before you put in for the grant. And there are strategies around that. And I think one of them is because there's so much work that needs to be done for a grant and there's so much competition, then if it's going to be new, and any grant, it has to be new, right? It has to be innovative, exciting, and policy relevant, amongst other things. Then you need to demonstrate your collaboration. So the first thing you're going to have to do is to really get on top of the field. The best way to do that is to do some kind of review, not necessarily a systematic review, but a realist review of some kind. So you're writing about the topic even as you imagine what the research might look like. Then you end up with a paper, and if you're lucky, it gets cited, and you've made an academic friend, and now you know where your research wants you want your research to go. And the a lot of really good collaborations have been born out of fairly strategic decisions about, well, let's do a paper on this topic first. And of course, that's a way of also testing whether the collaboration works, because if you have a collaborator and then you discover that you've done 95% of the work and you're very tired and annoyed by the end of it, it's not going to work, right? So it is a way of testing, as opposed to the person who halfway through writing, you're already planning the next paper and the next paper and the next research.
Yeah. What I like the most from your talk about this one, authors can be from different disciplines, but they actually sometimes do not really collaborate, Professor Lenore. Yeah, that one, if we explore more, we are going to have another episode. But let me get back to the global health research collaboration. From your experiences, Professor Lenore, would you like to share an example of a successful collaboration, probably your most successful collaboration in global health research?
I'm not sure that I'd want to single that out, but and I think but I will talk about one project in a moment. I think the hard lesson is to realize that people in teams bring very different skills, and to be generous to other people. So I am the kind of person who will work and work and work and work on things and then think, hang on, why am I doing it all? But it takes at least some thought to recognize that people bring very different things into a research project of any kind. And I mean, it was one of the lessons that we tried to encourage when I was teaching master's students in tropical health, that not everybody is going to be the person who can do the very fancy analysis, but they might have much better people skills than you. So you need them as well. The one I like, and I like it because it's been enduring, and we're only now getting round to the production. So years ago, meaning 2017, I and a younger researcher who's a demographer from London started talking with a team of other people about aging in a rural area in South Africa. And originally we were both going to be part of a very big grant. And then the person who was running the grant decided that having a social science arm was not going to fly with the grant they wanted. So we were waved goodbye. And rather than give up, we just kept talking. Well, let's do this anyway, and we'll put in for our own small grant. And one of the things about this person is, I hope it's mutual. Certainly, I respect his intellect and worth ethic and generosity. So, he's one of the few people that I always trust is really working on it and is able to talk through issues and in really helpful ways. But in the context of the two of us working, we've had postdocs of different kinds, and some of them have stayed with us longer than others, and they've all brought in different skills. And then there is a wider group of people who we've worked with lightly, although they were part of the grant, but they have brought very different invaluable skills. So they've brought an entire administration along with them, so that my work and my colleagues' work and our postdocs and our students' work is really only possible because other people have done the institutional building and capacity building behind us, and simply having them as people to sit and chat, including about forthcoming interventions, which is at the point where we've got to now, I think has been invaluable. But, you know, that's 7 years plus, with obviously a real hole in the research during the early COVID years. And I think that what was important about that is we kept the grant and our interests alive, even when we weren't doing any field work, rather than think, well, this is not worth it. Like, we had the grant, we weren't giving it away. So we just stayed in there. And we have, you know, relating to that, I think that what has made that work so invaluably has been a fortnightly Zoom, because we're on other sides of the world, and seeing each other to chat to, even if it's only a half an hour, means that the connection has stayed there. And I mean, we are so lucky now that we do have Zoom or Teams as a mechanism to maintain connection, because if we had to work the way I worked when I originally trained, a lot more teams would fall over. So, you know, I mean, I did my early research on a manual typewriter, and then letters went on a piece of paper into an envelope with a stamp, and then went off the other side of the world, and the answer came back 4 months later. We don't work like that now. But that also means that the intensity of the relationships at work aren't dependent on physically being in the same place. We can work across fields and countries and institutions, and of course, you know, funders amongst others and universities like that kind of connection because of what it brings. And I think most of us who work outside of our own institution and meet and work with and write with people who we don't see every day have been enormously enriched by the kind of variety of perspective that others bring. And that's not, of course, only a disciplinary variety. It's also life experience and intellectual agility of different kinds. And we've just been enormously privileged that we've been able to hold together academic and intellectual and friendship relationships as a result of technology.
Well, from your story, may I say that a successful collaboration for you is a meaningful collaboration? Is that correct, Professor Lenore? Is it?
Absolutely, absolutely. And you know, they don't have to be as, I mean, I've said, you know, for 7 years I've worked with this colleague in the UK. And I've been going back and forth from Australia to South Africa for 11 years, living in South Africa half the time. And that collaboration, which is with a country and an institution and individuals, has been really rewarding too. And of course, you know, the more one, I mean, anyone who can do that, I guess, is enormously privileged. And I'm very aware of that. But I also think that to some extent, I mean, the people I collaborate with are people I test out ideas with. So firstly, I have to trust them. And so it goes back to what works in a collaboration, that if I don't trust the person because I think their ideas are wrong, or because we simply irritate each other, or they don't think that my discipline is particularly relevant other than the grant said, and get an anthropologist or something like that. Like, you know, I mean, I think there are all of those kinds of things that play into collaborations. And of course, some collaborations are short term and they're no less rich. So when we supervise PhD students or postdocs, those are a collaboration of a kind. They just don't go on necessarily forever, though sometimes they transform and you remain friends and colleagues and co-researchers afterwards. And then you have to negotiate the whole sort of power, because clearly there's a change that happens in that process. Other collaborations are product specific, and whether the product is a research grant or an article that you want to write together, it doesn't matter, I don't think. I've intermittently done a range of reports and articles and so on where the collaboration has been short term. I edit a book series, and in that book series, I collaborate with the authors fairly intensively. So I have Zooms with them all the time. I don't say, write a book and send it in and thank you very much. And I learn an enormous amount from working with those people and reading what they're writing and engaging with them. And they don't all become my new best friends. They become people I've collaborated with, and then afterwards I see them at the odd conference. But I mean, it's the most extraordinary thing to be involved in people's work like that. And that happens, of course, with PhDs too, or with master's students. You're working with people who are starting a career and whose ideas are exciting, and just to work with them and encourage them to develop those ideas as a gift.
Yeah, it's true. That is a great point, actually. Well, last question for this episode, Professor Lenore. From your perspective, how can collaboration help address global health challenges in a more meaningful way?
I think the problem, all right, I'm going to deal with it a different way. I think the problem with lots of collaboration has been that the global north has dominated the global south, and there's no equality in those collaborations. One group gets the money, says what has to be done, the other group does all the work. So that a collaboration has to be a collaboration of equals, and it has to be respectful. And that includes respecting not just the willingness of a researcher to welcome you, the outsider, into their field. It has to be at every level, and that does mean that we all, and certainly those of us who are in the global north or in the global south, but with a foot in the global north, need to be awfully aware of the way in which we perpetuate inequalities and coloniality through our own academic practices. And you cannot have collaboration if you maintain an attitude that you know best, you know who all the important people are, and not being prepared to be learning. I said before that I edited a book series, and one of the books that I found very early absolutely inspirational was a book on mental health in Mexico, about which I know nothing. And the point about the book is that the author used Spanish-speaking scholars and Indigenous scholars and Indigenous voices to theorize mental health in the area she was working. And what it did was provide a freshness of approach that just wouldn't have been there if she had remained as she was doing her PhD, paying homage to the same scholars that everybody else was also acknowledging in their PhDs. Like, you could do a AI version of a PhD and just get AI to cite all the obvious people. But it is so exciting when you begin to think, all right, who don't I read because I don't even know that language, but what do they bring? And I think that that's true for any collaboration. And it's more than just acknowledging that people bring different power positions to a relationship of collaboration. It also means that everybody has to be open to learning from each other and taking forward that. And there are obvious difficulties in that, because not everyone is willing to think through those ideas, which is, how do I bring inequalities of power into this relationship, and what do I need to change to ensure that I don't perpetuate inequality?
Okay, so equality and respectful are very important for doing a meaningful collaborations, if I may say, Professor Lenore. You were mentioned about a book to give us an example, If I may ask, Professor Lenore, would you like to recommend one book for us for young researchers? Is there any that you would like to recommend us to read?
The problem is there are so many books, right?
Exactly. Your favorite one, probably.
No, I'd never say that. That would dismiss all the other people who are also favourites. But in fact, I do want to just talk a tiny bit about that book series, but it's got nothing to do with collaboration, right? Other than that, as the editor, I collaborated to bring those books alive. One of the books was a really interesting one in terms of publication, and it's a book. And the researcher came to me originally with PhD data that was about a decade old. And for anthropology, that's not entirely a problem, but COVID changed everything. And I felt that she needed to engage with COVID. So in the end, she was moving between 2012, 13 and 2020, 2022. And in doing that in writing, instead of doing the usual book, which goes introduction, chapters 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then conclusion, had like 50 short chapters. And it's a beautiful book. And it's so engaging, and it proves the way in which the best anthropology is like a very good novel. A colleague of mine who was director of the James Grant School of Public Health in Bangladesh did a similar thing with her book, which is called Children of Crows, which is about people who live in slums and who were evicted. And so one of the women said, we're like children of crows. We just have to keep on moving to find somewhere to settle. And she had data from 2002 and then 2020. And originally was the early data. And I said, no, more research. You need people. We need to know what's happening now. And you can't write an ethnography that's simply historic. And of course, what she showed by that comparison of time was how little things have changed for poor people. And I would not have known that when I first read her work, really. And neither she nor I would have said, this is about the persistence of inequality among the world's poorest people. But by virtue of having some quite old ethnographic material with very new, fresh material, all of these characters came alive. And as an anthropologist, I mean, the storytelling is part of what I really value. And whether it's a short paper or whether it's a book I've written or edited, or whether it's a book someone else has edited or written, getting the reader to be engaged is so exciting and important. So both of those, and I just want to give you one other little example, which is about how things get linked together. And there's a book by a woman called Mette Nordahl Svensson in the series I edit called Near Human. And I'll share the name with you. And it's a book about the fact that infants in who are born prematurely are at risk of a necrotizing bacteria in the gut and die. Right. So the main reason why premature babies die is from gastrointestinal immaturity and so on. And it turns out that colostrum from cows is actually quite helpful. You can't get colostrum from humans, good enough for all these little NICU babies in neonatal intensive care units, because there's no sort of, women only produce a little bit of colostrum for their own baby, but cows are kept pregnant largely to make milk, to produce cheese, etc. So this is a story about what happens when you follow through an idea. So the idea was, we'll get colostrum from the cows, and this is in Denmark, right? The setting's in Denmark. You can't experiment with human babies like that and see what happens with cows' colostrum. And biologically, very close to humans is the pig. So you've got in Copenhagen the neonatal intensive care unit with all these premature babies, and just down the road, a neonatal intensive care unit for piglets. And so we've got all these baby pigs whose veterinary nurses are feeding them cow's colostrum to see if they can prevent the necrotizing bacterial infections of babies. And it works. However, Denmark has not got the facilities to dry colostrum, to have cow colostrum powder to feed premature babies. So they link up with China, and the colostrum from the cows in Denmark go to China to be converted into these special formulas for babies that go back to Denmark to keep those babies alive, and are used for Chinese babies too. The story is about research with animals, the need to keep baby humans alive, the cattle industry, international global relations, ethics, and just about everything else. And it's an adventure story. And to some extent, our research is a little like that too. Any research, but certainly research on complex problems like One Health and wicked problems, and that looks at complexity. It's about a mystery that you're trying to solve, and each different researcher or research arm adds to the puzzle that you can then begin to unpick. So the challenge then in writing a good book is to turn it into a mystery story for academics.
Yeah, it's true. Well, it's very interesting, especially about the cow's colostrum, Professor Lenore. Colostrum is a fresh milk from cow when they deliver the calf, right? The very
That's right.
first one.
Yep. And the detail they gave, I was going to say what they told the cows, what they told the cattle breeders was that each cow that had a calf, they took half of the colostrum for experimental purposes, and the little calf got the rest of the colostrum. So they weren't taking colostrum away from calves. So it's a whole puzzle. But I think all of the research we're doing, and certainly TDR research, is all about unpicking those puzzles, and malaria and schistosomiasis and all of those, any parasitic disease that's been neglected is one about putting together all those puzzles and bringing in people from different disciplines to collaborate in order to solve the mystery.
I will try my best to find those books and read about it. Well, Professor Lenore, thank you so much for shedding light on the power of collaboration in global health research. Even you mentioned One Health. Your insight remind us that research isn't just about individual achievements, it's about teamwork and shared goals. To our listeners, remember to take the initiative to building your networks. Collaboration doesn't just happen, it is something you actively create. In the next episode, we will dive into an equally important topic, gender equity in research, and the unique challenges faced by early career researchers. Until next time, stay connected, stay curious, and keep collaborating. My name is Rima. I'm signing out. See ya.
Thank you.